I'd like to welcome everybody today to our webinar on behalf of Human Rights Education Review and the WERA International Research Network on Human Rights Education. It's really a delight to see you all today and to welcome some new faces and to welcome particularly some colleagues from Denmark. And we're very pleased to have colleagues from Denmark and also today to have a presenter from Denmark. Our presenter this evening, I'd like to introduce her briefly, is Eva Lindhardt from Copenhagen University College. Her work, broadly speaking, is in the field of human rights education, religious education, and democratic citizenship. And we invited Eva to speak this evening to her paper, which was recently published in a special edition of Human Rights Education Review in January this year. And those of you who have a particular interest, not just in human rights education, but in religious education, we invite you to take a look at that edition because it is looking at the intersection of these two fields of work and some important issues that Eva, I know, is going to be talking about tonight, about children's rights, about children's freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of thought. And these are important issues, not just in Denmark and not just in the Nordic countries, but also across the globe. So we're very, very pleased to have this session tonight. Eva, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about your work, but I would draw everybody's attention to a book that's coming out, the Routledge International Handbook of Religion in Early Childhood. And Eva has made a contribution to that, which is shortly to be published, on human rights issues related to questions of religion in early childhood education and care. We're very, very pleased to hand over to you. Eva's got a very, very interesting presentation ahead of us, and we really look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Audrey, and thank you for everyone joining this webinar from different parts of the world. And I'm very delighted to be invited to contribute to this excellent webinar series of human rights education. The theme or topic of today is human rights education as a framework for transmitting religion as cultural heritage. And I do hope that this webinar today can further elaborate some of the perspectives from Audrey Osler's and Jon Arne Skarder's webinar titled The Rhetoric and Reality of Human Rights Education, Policy Frameworks and Teacher Perspectives, because they explore some of the same challenges related to linking majority religion to national identity. After the presentation, I will appreciate to have your comments and questions, so just post those questions in the chat. The photo on these first slides is showing two runestones from Denmark. It is from the 10th century. And it is runestone ordered by King Harald Bluetooth. And I think you know Bluetooth from the for the connection between different devices, the wireless connection. But here it is in another case, and I will come back to the first one from the devices. But this is about Harald, King Harald Bluetooth, that says that he won for himself all of Denmark and Norway and made the Danes Christian. And you can ask yourself why I do integrate this in my presentation. Transmitting religion as cultural heritage is also often related to linking religion and national identity. And actually, this runestone has become known as the birth certificate of Denmark. The text on the runestone also shows some challenges concerning transmitting cultural heritage. And I have mentioned them here. The first one is contested narratives. As in this case, there were also contested narratives in Norway and Denmark concerning the conquest of Norway. And we often see this when we are transmitting cultural heritage, that there are contested narratives. Some of them may also be related to power and representation. For example, the elite versus the common man. In this case, we also saw that King Harald Bluetooth proclaims that he made all the Danes Christians, but we know that the common man everywhere in Denmark didn't become Christian at this time. And you will see this, it shows that also we need to focus on representation when we transmit religion as cultural heritage and all the relation between majority and minority. The relationship between religion and cultural identity is also mentioned on the runestone, as it says that all the Danes are Christians. And it also have some challenges that we see when we transmit cultural heritage concerning inclusion and exclusion. And also in this case, concerning the freedom of religion and beliefs. From the reception history, we also can see that transmitting religion as cultural heritage is also going on, and you can reinterpret what this runestone means. As I mentioned, the wireless Bluetooth is actually related to this King Harald Bluetooth and named after him, because he was connecting Denmark and Norway, and the wireless is connecting different devices. You also see a new narrative about this runestone in the Danish passport, as I will show you here. This is the first page of the Danish passport, showing this Christ figure from the runestone. There has also been some discussion relating to this symbol in the passport, as an atheist Danish citizen filed a complaint to the Danish Ministry of Justice, arguing that passports should be free of religious symbols. This also raises a question about religion as cultural heritage. Is it linked to religious affiliation, or is it linked to geographical affiliation? And it shows that when it comes to not just cultural heritage, but religious cultural heritage, it is quite complex, and we need to have attention on the diversity in the society. I will just mention a few examples. There are a lot more of research into this field, and how religion and national narratives are transmitted in non-confessional religious education. Both Lars Lert Iversen from Norway and Karne Kjeldsen from Denmark have studied the linking of religion and national identity in religious education, and also focus on that there is a tendency for a monocultural and essentialist concepts of culture and religion related to this. Often, this is also related to an focus on transmitting cultural heritage, which aims at cultural preservation. And that is that you want to, that you think of the national community as based on common values. Lars Iversen developed another concept of community of disagreement, where he is defining it as a community not based on shared values, but based on shared challenges, and opening up for a more critical approach, a critical or culture critic approach to transmitting religion as cultural heritage, will also focus on majority and minority issues related to power to narrate, as we also saw with Oslo and Skara's webinar some months ago. My key questions related to transmitting religion as cultural heritage is, and this is from my paper, how is the child's right to freedom of religion and belief and the parents' right to raise their child in their own faith safeguarded when religious education includes transmitting majority religion as cultural heritage? And how can human rights education promote an inclusive and pedagogical approach in religious education? And we will start with the first question to explore how human rights as a frame for religious education. These 3 articles from human rights treaties express the key human rights framework to safeguard the parents' and the child's right in religious education. The first, from the Protocol number 1 to European Convention of Human Rights, ensures that the parents' right to choose education for their children in accordance with their own religion and philosophical convictions. So human rights issues related to religious education also concerns the parents' rights. The second concerns the child's rights to freedom of religion and belief from the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And the last one is from the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and secures the child's rights to personal development and obligation, and to respect the rights of others. And this is concerning a broad understanding of education, and not just religious education, of course. There might be conflicts between some of these rights. For example, the child's rights to freedom of religion and belief, and the parents' rights to choose education for their children in accordance with their own religion could have a collision. And also when we look at these rights, we will sometimes have to balance, and that is also what makes the dilemmas and the discussion in this area. More specific related to non-confessional religious education, we also find case law from the European Court of Human Rights that provide a framework for religious education, including a case from Norway, where a former subject, the case law from Norway reveals that if the parents as well as the child's rights should not be violated, non-confessional religious education needs to be conveyed in an objective, critical, and pluralistic manner. You can say that no teaching is fully objective, which is also underlined in the next quote from the Toledo Guiding Principles. However, the more religious, doctrinal, or philosophically oriented the subject and teaching context, the more possibilities there are for conflict with the rights of parents and guardians to have their children educated in accordance with their philosophical or religious convictions, and the greater the likelihood is that some type of opt-out provision would be appropriate. The question is here, when a subject is properly objective, critical, and pluralistic to safeguard the child's and the parents' rights. When we look at human rights issues in non-confessional religion, we can turn to these three approaches, at least the last one is not non-confessional, but I will explore why it is in this model. The two first, learning about and learning from religion, is introduced by Michael Grimmett, and he says that learning about religion concerns knowledge and information about religion, while learning from religion is related to a more existential approach. And that means also that learning from religion relate the knowledge of religion to the student's own experiences and own life worlds. Related to learning about religion, we can discuss representation, as I mentioned before, and which narratives should be included when religion is transmitted as cultural heritage. Turning to the lines between learning from religion and religious instruction, we find that the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion and Belief distinguish between religious information and learning about religion and religious instruction. And he is defining the latter as confessional teaching. However, he also underlines that non-confessional teaching includes learning from religion, and there could be cases where the teaching risk of overlap with religious instruction, which is marked with these arrows on the model. It also shows that there will be different opinions of where this line should be. And I will give you two examples of this. Karna Kjeldsen, who have made studies of religious education in Denmark, research, are critical of learning from religion as such, and in particular when the majority religion becomes the only religion to learn from. And she says there is a gray zone related to religious, because there will be a gray zone related to religious instruction. For this reason, she advocates for only including an academical approach related to learning about religion. However, it can also be discussed if there is a sharp boundary between learning about religion and learning from religion. As Robert Jackson puts it, the activity of grasping another's way of life is inseparable in practice from that of pondering on these issues and questions raised by it. In his interpretive approach, he includes learning from religion in the sense of students' reflection on own interpretation, values, and outlooks. The different approaches and examples shows that it is not just about what to transmit, but also how and to whom. The scholar in education, Dietrich Benner, divided education or Bildungstheories in two clusters. The first is affirmative theories, and they concern transmitting cultural heritage as performed doctrines to the next generation. And it is also what you can call a very strong focus on socialization. The non-affirmative theories is focusing on the child's interaction with the subject and content, and also its raising of new Christians. And it is focusing on that we are not just culture created, but also culture creative. I will now turn to the case of Denmark after this introduction to show how some of these issues that I have mentioned can be related to the Danish curriculum. Just to set in context, I will say a little bit about majority religion in Denmark. We have freedom of religion and belief is a constitutional right in Denmark, and the majority religion is the Evangelical Lutheran Church, which is supported by the state. And approximately 75% of the population in Denmark is members. However, most of them are not religious practitioners. And in this sense also, you can say that Denmark is actually known as being one of the most secular countries in the world. However, they do have you can say on the level of practice, religious practice, but not on, of course, on the constitutional level. The religious education is non-confessional. However, it is called kristendomskundskab, which means knowledge of Christianity. So it is also in the name very related to the majority religion. And even though the subject is categorized as non-confessional, it has an exemption clause, and I will look more into that. As mentioned, the exemption clause could be a way of protecting the child's and parents' rights, also in a non-confessional religious education. If the learning from religion is in risk of overlapping with religious instruction. However, the question is if the exemption clause also could be protecting not the child and parents, but the state. For instance, for offering an objective, pluralistic, and critical religious education. This is a quote from a former Minister of Education in Denmark, which underlines this point. It says, "It is the enemies of KR who wants to ban hymn, singing and prayers from the teaching. I can only imagine what the Humanist Association will do. They will immediately sue and say that then you must not do this and that. The exemption clause is thus the safety valve that gives teachers of KR the freedom to teach the children hymns and say the Lord's Prayer." As you can see from this quote, this subject doesn't seem non-confessional. However, I should say that this is not, it was also at that time forbidden to say prayers in the subject. And it is not representative for the Danish politicians. But still, this quote shows that how legislation originally meant to safeguard the parents' and child's rights can be used to protect not the child's and parents, but the state. And that we need to be aware of who the exemption clause actually is protecting when we have the subjects of religious education. This is the main content of the Danish religious education subject. And the national curriculum consists of some mandatory objectives, but also optional guidelines. The mandatory topics you see here is mostly related to Christianity, at least from grade 1 to 6. Christianity is the only mandatory religion to be taught, and not before grades 7 to 9 we have the non-Christian religions and other outlooks. In the model on the right side, you also see that the first topic, life philosophy and ethics, is placed in the center. And this model is from the guidelines to the subject. The life philosophy and ethics is placed here to show how all other main topics should be linked to life philosophy and ethics. And life philosophy can be maybe quite a difficult term to define, but it is related to existential questions and the common condition of human life. And it also shows how all the topics in the Danish subject is related to this existential approach and to a learning from religion. When we see in the national curriculum between the mandatory objectives and the optional guidelines, we also see some discrepancies, because the mandatory objectives focus on a very monocultural approach to the subject, where Christianity is the only religion to be mentioned in the learning objectives until the 7th grade. However, in the optional guideline, we see that more religions, they suggest that more religions are introduced also in grade 1 to 6. And it is a general tendency that the guideline is more focused on plurality and including minority religions than the learning objectives in the national curriculum. However, also in the guidelines, we find a different approach to majority religion than to minority religion. The study of Christianity reveals a more emic approach, and with an emic approach, it is an approach focused on the insider's perspective. Here you can see it by using Christian terminology like sin, guilt, doubt, faith, hope, forgiveness, the kingdom of God. When we go to the other religions, we meet a more ethic approach, where it's focusing on learning about religion using comparative categories such as myth, rituals, salvation, sacred, profane, purity, impurity. The guideline do encourage the inclusion of specific concepts from other religions too. However, specific concepts are not mentioned in the guidelines. This is also highlighting another issue related to transmission of religion as cultural heritage. It concerns when do minority religions become part of the cultural heritage. In teacher education, Islam is explicitly mentioned now as the largest minority religion in Denmark in the religious education subjects. However, we do not find this in the school's curriculum yet. There might be arguments based on cultural heritage for treating religions quantitatively different, but to impose a qualitative different approach to religion is a problem in religious education and shows a problem between a minority and a majority approach. This example shows the need to be aware of non-discrimination in religious education. And the question is if human rights education can contribute to strengthening an awareness of this, of the child's rights and the parents' rights. Human rights education concerns education about, through, and for human rights. Education about human rights is, for instance, knowledge and understanding of human rights norms and principles. And education through human rights concerns focus on learning environment where both learners and educators' rights are respected. Education for human rights includes empowering persons to enjoy and exercise their rights and to respect and uphold the rights of others. I will now see how this could be implemented in human rights education as a frame for teaching religion as cultural heritage. Concerning teaching for human rights in religious education, the students should be prepared to live and act in a diverse and pluralistic society with respect for other people's worldviews and their rights for freedom of religion and belief. The teaching should also promote the students' understanding of themselves as both cultural created and cultural creative. And this means that it should not be a very affirmative approach to transmit religion as cultural heritage. And there should be this cultural critical approach that support the students' ability to take a critical stance to national narratives and religion transmitted as cultural heritage. When we turn to teaching about human rights in religious education, learning about freedom of religion and belief should, of course, be part of the subject. And also human rights norms and principles such as non-discrimination and equality. To come to know how discrimination and violation of freedom of religion and belief could be expressed or could be a reality, the religious education could include national examples of this. And also issues related to collisions between freedom of religion and belief and non-discrimination. Because there might be conflicts between freedom of religion and belief and other rights in terms of gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity. To address this is not an easy task, as there might be tensions between the values of human rights and some interpretation of religion. And it might be quite controversial also to include in the teaching. However, I think it is very important to address this subject too. When we look at teaching through human rights, it concerns both the subject content and methodology and the pedagogical approach. Concerning the subject content, we should be aware of the subject topics and of the representation and also presentation of religions, as well as if we teach and create awareness of diversity within a religion. It also concerns treating religions methodically similar, as I've shown before. There should not be qualitatively differences between how you treat the majority religion and how you treat other religions. Turning to the pedagogical approach, it is very important to avoid to create a majority we based on the majority religion outlook and values. There needs to be a non-affirmative approach, not aimed at reproducing established national narratives, but allowing students to question and critically examine them. A more critical approach could enable the classroom to function as a community of disagreement, in the sense that fundamental human rights, norms, and principles provides a framework for a non-consensus seeking conversation. How this human rights is able to do this? This issue also concerns how human rights can be the frame and not the aim. And when I make this distinction, it is also because in a maximalist approach to human rights as an aim, it could be just another collective narrative about common values that will unite the society and global community. While a minimalistic approach to see human rights as a frame delimits human rights as dealing with basic human condition and distinguishes between the universal common condition and the particular that relates to specific communities and societies. You can say that even a community of disagreement needs a minimum of shared values. And I also argue that human rights education can be this frame. However, where to place the line between human rights as an aim and human rights as a frame must be an ongoing debate. And I also do hope that this presentation can function as a part of that discussion. So now it is time for questions, and I hope you understand my English, even I am a bit nervous. And all your questions are very welcome.
Thank you very, very much, Eva, for presenting what is a very, very complex tension, I think, in Denmark and elsewhere between transmitting cultural heritage and through religious education. I found it very, very thought-provoking that a country that aims that presents itself as so secular should be so challenged by this issue of transmitting cultural heritage through religious education. And I wonder if you could just say briefly, I know we will have some questions, but I invite people to start pinning their questions now. If you could say a little bit about why this focus on Christianity, why is it named in religious education? What's the political context in Denmark that has caused that to happen when Danish society has become so much more secular, that there should be so much more concern on renaming and emphasizing Christianity? I noticed that you showed us the model of religions, and I noticed also the model talked about non-Christian religions rather than world religions. So yeah. Christianity is the frame all the time, even when we're talking about other religions. So I wonder if you could say something about the politics in Norway before in Denmark before we move on to other questions.
Yes. You can say this subject has formally been non-confessional since 1975. Before that, it was a confessional subject. And there has in this time been a lot of discussion about changing the name from this knowledge of Christianity or Christianity studies, also because at least it do include other religions also mandatory in the grades 7 to 9, and in practice it actually do. So it's also, you can see there is this discrepancy between the guidelines that is formulated also by educators and the objectives that will be approved by the politicians. I think it is, I think it have even been maybe more difficult the last 10-15 years, this issue, because of immigration and because of some parties is relating a Danish nationality more and more to Christianity. It is not that it's not aimed at that the religious education should be preaching or making the children religious. It is only related to this focus on national identity and Christianity as values, and maybe values in contrast to also Islam in some cases, or for some politicians at least. I also think that there might be another reason with this focus very much on life philosophy that is related also to a tradition of focusing on Bildung. What the German word Bildung, it is, you can say, general education or personal formation. And there is a very strong tradition for this in the religious education in Denmark. And I think, both as, and there's also a good side of that and a more difficult side, especially when it is related only to Christianity as majority religion.
Thank you. I think Shahina Shah has a question she would like to put to you. Shahina, would you like to introduce yourself and ask your question to Eva?
And just a minute, should I stop sharing or is it?
Probably it's easier unless, then we can all see each other better. Thank you.
So,
Shahina, still there? I can't see her for the moment. Let's take the question then. The next one from Meta. Meta has a question. I can do it.
Yes, I've just turned on my mic. I'm with you joining from Copenhagen, and thank you, Eva, for this great input. I just, I was wondering, as I put in the question, is there any evidence about if teachers in Denmark, they actually do teach in other non-Christian religions in grade 1 to 6 in the Danish schools, even though it's only a guideline in the curriculum? That was my question. Thank you.
Yes, unfortunately, we have very little research on religious education in Denmark, and especially in the classroom. So we know very little about what is going on, at least on a research level. But I think it will be very seldom that you will see that other religions is not introduced from grade 1. You will also see that the teaching material, I don't think you will have published any teaching magisterial in Denmark today, which will not include other religions. So you have this discrepancy between the intended curriculum and the practiced curriculum. And I also think that maybe that underlines also that this naming of the subject is very much a political matter, more than also it is intended to be to exclude every other religions in the actual teaching.
Thank you. We have two questions about human rights I'd like to take together, and then a question from Manfred, which is much more about the relationship between cultural heritage and religion. So I'm going to ask Gania to speak, and then Mariettu, and then perhaps you can try and bring those two questions together, Eva.
Yeah.
So is Gania there? Again, I can't see what's happened there. Okay, Mariettu, would you like to put your question, and then we'll move to Manfred's question?
Yes, my question was, in your opinion, Eva, is it possible to change religious education in Denmark to such an extent that the teacher will use human rights education as a framework?
On the practical level, yeah, I think it is. And I also think that on the practical level, we do at teacher education prepare our students to be aware of all these subjects, to be aware of diversity, to be aware of representation, to be aware of not just exclusively have the learning from the majority religion, but if the learning from should be part of the subject, it should be related to other religions too, and also to non-religious outlooks. So I think in teacher education, there is quite a lot of awareness on this. In that way, I think it is, but I think it is always difficult, as you know, with human rights. If you don't have the rights as also a legislation, you cannot be sure that you can rely on them. It will be much more. I mean, you need it in the mandatory objectives if you really want to have the practice in the school to secure it, that it is also what is done. I don't know if I answered your question.
I think it's a big question. I will, Mariettu, I should have asked her to introduce herself. She's speaking from Norway. I'm going to turn now to Manfred and ask him to introduce himself briefly before asking his question.
Yes, hello to everybody, and thank you, Eva, for your interesting presentation. I'm professor of religious education in Germany, in Nuremberg at university. And I have been interested in human rights education for quite a long time. So I was interested to hear your conceptual framework that you were trying to unfold. And I was wondering whether the concentration on religion as a cultural heritage is not falling short of taking religion seriously in its present ambivalence and also in its present relevance. I mean, perhaps you know that in Germany we have this kind of confessional approach still in many of the German states, focusing on Christian religious education, Protestant, Catholic, also Islamic. And we have moved, a couple of years ago, we have moved from this rather cultural heritage approach to a more problem-centered approach. So that means taking religion as, well, a problem, but also a potential for people's lives and for the life of society. And that, of course, requires also a theological perspective that comes into the concept of religious education. And I was wondering also when I heard your talk, where is the kind of internal perspective, the theological perspective? Are there approaches in your country from a theological point of view that would say, okay, human rights are very important and there is some kind of convergence here? So not just human rights coming from outside and being the framework for religious education, but also, on the other hand, a theological perspective coming from inside, from inside the religious education, the Christian religious education, that would perhaps even support your move to human rights education.
Thank you.
Yes. To the last point, I will just, or Christian, I will just say that even though I have now shown how much the Christianity fills in the religious education in Denmark, it is not it's not a theological approach in the sense that you will use, I mean, the churches in Denmark will have these relations between human rights issues and Christianity, and we can also learn about that in the subject. What I want to say was that it will be from the outside position and not from an inside position of the religions. And we need to make this distinction and are also doing this quite clearly. However, the concern about Christianity as cultural heritage, I think there are, I think we need to be aware of also that the reason that the majority religion is almost always having more space in religious education is because of that it is a cultural heritage, or it is because of the position it has had in the society. And in that way, I think that when I talk about these different approaches, an affirmative or a non-affirmative approach to religion as cultural heritage, it is that I would not say that we should not learn about the majority religion and the history of it, and also traditions we see today. But I think if you learn about it in a non-affirmative way, also including different kinds of narratives, including power, what do you call it? You include different rights, different narratives, and who has the right to make these narratives. If you include all this, you will have also be more aware of and be able to take a more critical stance. But I would also like maybe to ask you, when you say that you don't teach it as a cultural heritage, does it mean that you don't see the religions in a national or context, or in context of the society?
Well, we said that we more ask about the current relevance of religion in our society and also the ambivalence. Of course, there are many negative aspects to religion. For instance, the position of the Orthodox leader Kirill in the Ukraine war, that is highly problematic. But there are also human rights organizations, for instance, inside the church or inside church communities or having come out of church communities. So where the church plays a very constructive and positive roles in promoting human rights.
Yeah.
And so that has not so much to do with the past, so with the cultural heritage, as you might call it, but it has more to do with the present relevance of religion. And yeah, and maybe we can say that we find it more important to address this current topical relevance than looking to the past and what Christianity has been in the past. Although this, of course, is also a part of religious education.
Yeah, and I think my point is also that looking at the current is also what Lars Lert Iversen talks about, maybe relating national identity with the values from religion. That could also be part of the current narratives about the cultural heritage. So it's not that we are just looking back, but I think to know about different narratives of cultural heritage, to know about representation that we know to be critical, to what is the aims of these narratives of the past. I think it is not just to learn about the past, it is actually to learn about the current society and what is going on now. For example, also in relation to why is it so difficult to change this name on the religious education subject in Denmark. It concerns both cultural heritage, but it concerns also the interpretation of this in our current society.
I'm very, very aware that we have more and more questions coming up, and they always come up at this very late point when we haven't got a chance to answer them. But we had a question from Shahina Shah, again, I think didn't speak when I asked earlier, but she wants to know, how can we protect human rights? And my question, just to end with a yes, no, if this is not too challenging, I would like to ask you, Eva, do you think that in the religious education classroom in Denmark on a daily basis, that children's freedom of religion is protected? Are we protecting children's human rights? We've talked about the state. We've talked about parents. Just if you could answer very, very briefly indeed, like one sentence.
I can't put one sentence. I will say we need more research into this, because I can only count on my experiences, and so we do not have research. I think in the praxis, it looks better than in the curriculum, I'm sure. However, I think that is this making this that is maybe a secular Protestant I think you will find it in some of the teaching, and it's also a problem that quite a lot of the teachers are not educated. More than 60% of the teachers teaching this subject is not educated, and that means that they do not have this more critical perspectives in their education, and that is really a problem.
Thank you, Eva. I think you've gone some way to answering Samira's question, who asked about the research and whether because we now know that there is relatively little research there. I'm not going to take any further questions now, but you do have Eva's contacts in the chat line at the beginning. You do also have the opportunity to read her article in depth. I would just like warmly to thank you for a very interesting presentation, and all of you for asking questions that get more and more interesting and provocative as we go along, I guess. I would like finally to tell you about the next seminar, which is on the 29th of June, when we will have a presenter from the University of Helsinki, and you can find the details of that seminar on the Human Rights Education Review website, and Piers has printed it there for you. I'd like to thank everybody for coming along, especially to have so many new faces, so many religious educators present today. I know we had people here from countries where there is no religious education in schools, like in France. I know we had others from Sri Lanka, where it's a very, very different situation. We've had a very, very broad audience, and we haven't got to grips with the very, very vast experience that we've got in this chat room right now. But I do thank you all for coming along, and I do invite you to read Eva's paper, and maybe your questions will be answered in whole or in part. And I think the message I take from this is that we do really need a lot more research on religious education in Denmark, and I would also add from my reading, we also need a lot more research on human rights education in Denmark. So we thank you very warmly for what you've done today, and thank everybody for attending. Goodbye.
Thank you.